what parents need to know about distance learning and keeping their kids busy and learning during the summer. So we've had a guide called Charter a Summer of Learning, and we've been partnering with different schools and nonprofits to talk about activities that families can do at home with their kids. And the one we have today, it's not a science project, it's not a craft, it's more of an overall approach to learning. And so we're going to hear from Johnston, who's the head of school at Anne Frank Inspire Academy, which is a school. It's part of Brain Nation. They have a campus located at on the northwest side at let's see, Loop 1604 in Bandera, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of near Helotes, yeah. So yeah, Justin is the head of school there, and he wrote a post, and the link is in the description of the video. So I encourage you to go, read the post. He does a great job of laying out their approach to inquiry-based learning, which is maybe a term you've heard before, but I think when you read his post, you really understand what the benefits are and how it builds on kind of kids' natural curiosity. So Justin, I wanted to ask you, so you start out the post by talking about like all these like questions that kids ask, right? Sometimes as parents, we feel overwhelmed by the amount of questions, and sometimes it's like, it's a good question, I don't know the answer. And so we're kind of stumped, right? We don't want to bluff, we don't want to like lie to them or pretend we know. Right. But how is that, like all these questions that kids ask, like how is that like the starting point for this?
Yeah, I think when we go back and we just look at human development, right, we're born curious and we have this curiosity that's just inside of us. And one of the things that as in education that we have to accept responsibility is, do we keep that curiosity growing, or do we kill it, right? And so that's one of the things that we're really have to explore. And so what this model does is it allows for us to take any question. There's no question too small, there's no question too big, and allow for us to just kind of learn to explore those things together. And for us to teach our kids, and not only our kids, because we firmly believe that this is what learning is all about. And so even as adults, right, as we get inundated with too much information, how do we filter out that information and start to learn for ourselves? And so it's really a process. And we were extremely grateful to have the opportunity to share it with y'all. And I know, like you said, it's not just one project, because we want to kind of give to people a tool that can fit them and allow for relevance to exist inside of their lives on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that so in the post, like you sort of give examples of topics, but it's really about like parents having a conversation with their kids and like asking them about what they're curious and what they're noticing. And I think one thing that this tool could be really useful for is like, kids, they hear us talking, they might see things on social media, they're becoming aware of current events, and they might have questions related to current events and what's happening in the world. And I think that's something you touch on in the post. So what was your advice about inquiry-based learning and like making it relevant, to what's happening in the world and current events?
So that's where the beauty lies, is that a lot of times we try to make learning relevant, and with inquiry, the relevancy already exists. So one of the things that we touch on inside of the post is urgency and agency. And so each one of us has an agency. And you're like a beautiful example of that agency, right? Like you truly believe in empowering parents to make choices and understanding what choices are best for their families, and not guide them in one direction, but just say, hey, here's information for you to be able to explore that for your family. So that's your agency, is education in itself and empowering parents. And then the urgency comes when the parent has a need for that change, or has a need for that choice. And so that's where, when we take that to a broader scale, and we start looking at, well, what is my child's agency? And one of the best places to look is there's 17 goals from like the UN that they want to accomplish by 2030, right? And so some of those are like no poverty, or clean, sustainable water. You look at quality education, or equity, affordable clean energy. So there's a lot of different places that are already relevant in our world, that if we just want to dive into that. Again, inquiry allows for it to be scalable regardless of age. And so a kindergartner may not be overly concerned about equality. as we know equality to be, right? But they may be concerned about sharing, and why do I need to share? Why do I need to be compassionate to others? And so there's things that you can explore regardless of the age or the situation. And so let's say, for example, you got three kids inside of your house, and all of them are within about 4 years apart, and learning to work together as a family or as a unit, as a team. Right? There's a lot of ways that you can explore that as a family. That the urgency all of a sudden at the ages of 6 to 10 become really relevant, right? And become there, and so. The learning can happen with whatever's going on in your life. The way that we used that this year was as we moved into remote learning, we asked our students what the current state of the world was, and we allowed them K-12 to explore that current state of the world. Of course, at the older levels, they may have gotten more into actual COVID, where at the younger levels, it may have just been about germs, and it may have just been about hygiene and how to maintain that. And then we gave them that way. And I know we're going to dive into that in just a minute when we start talking about the steps, but we gave them a way to express what it was that they were learning that really allowed them to tie into their agency, in the way that they wanted to share their learning process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying about how it varies depending on kids' age, but the approach scales depending on what questions that they're asking and what aspects of the situation in the world that they pick up on, right?
Yeah. And then,
They might notice about shortages or something, you know, that
yeah, our problems are our problems, right? So when you start talking to when you talk to my 8-year old, he's going to tell you he has a toy shortage, right? When you talk to me, I'm going to tell you I got a bank account shortage. Like it is, resources are resources, and so it's relevant based off of the time in which you're living, and you can really track that back. And I don't want to go off the deep end here, but you can really track that back down to seasons of people's lives. Um, what was relevant to me before I was married isn't what's relevant to me today. What was relevant to my family before we had kids isn't what's relevant to me today, right? And so we want to create a process that regardless of the season that you're in your life, you have the ability to really embrace and love learning.
yeah, right. It doesn't stop when they graduate high school. This is an approach
Correct.
that they can carry with them. Well, you mentioned that that there are these like 6 steps for inquiry-based learning, and the blog post lays that out very clearly. So again, the link is in the description. I encourage people to click through and see it there and refer to it. But can you kind of talk to us about how that played out, like how it worked for your students in the spring with their projects, or like how these steps apply?
Yeah, so it starts by simply identifying the question, right, that you wanna ask, and what makes our unique so different is the broader the question, the better the question, because of the fact that it allows for you to use your agency to navigate throughout that. So, if I was to turn around and just say, "Hey, you know, homelessness inside of urban cities," right? Well, that becomes a very limited topic. But if I start talking about poverty, well, poverty, one of the things that would really motivate me to learn about is that edge poverty, right, where I'm not middle class, but I'm not homeless, and what exists inside of there. And so you open up that broad gap. Poverty could also kick into emotional poverty, and so you allow for that to be explored in as many different ways as possible. So you identify that question, and then the second thing we do is we activate, and we activate your curiosity inside of that. So we're talking right now as if I had a question to start with, but it's also something that we can guide. So, for example, our kids may not have ever wondered about the current state of the world, but we said, "Hey, tell us about the current state of the world," and then we activated that with both reading and through visuals, right? So you can show pictures, you can show graphs, you can give an article to read, you can show a video, and then you kind of stay out of the way and allow them to extract what they see and what their curiosity is outside of that. And it may again go down a path that you may not necessarily have meant for it to be. But one of the things that I really like to draw that back to is our medical field. You never find two doctors that are the same. We have doctors that have different agency that they want to explore all the way from the head to the toe, right? And so when we start activating these things, we want to allow for that movement to exist inside of there. We follow that up, that activate by having kids reflect on that process, and this is where we refer to them as the 5 Fs. But this is where you really start to explore some individuality, and allow for the process to really start to kick in. And so with that, right, we want to look at, your first impressions. What was it that you just noticed right off the bat? Your feelings. How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel good? Did it make you feel bad? Did it make you feel sad? And then you look at facts. So what are some of the things that are in this picture, or some of the things that's in this graph that, just are cold hard facts that can't be argued? And then we talk about findings. And so the difference between feelings and findings is we take all of the things that we've noticed, we felt, and we know to be true, and we form a definition, or a finding. And so we combine all of those things together to really start to understand what it is that we're processing. And then the last step, of course, is that future. Is how is this relevant to me going forward? And we have to be ready sometimes for people to say, you know what, it's not really relevant. And it's not really something that I want to follow, or it doesn't really pertain to what it is that I'm looking for. And think about that for a second. If we can start to get people to filter information by following a process and know whether or not something's important or not important, with social media, with news in our face all the time, we kind of get overwhelmed, right? Of, hey, this has got to happen right now, and this is important right now. And we really need to educate people on how to turn around and say, hey, that's important to my life, or that's not important to my life. And I can focus on that, or I don't need to focus on that. So that activate step is really a big major part. Now in this, we spend a week, you can spend 2 weeks, you can spend an hour, you can spend 5 minutes. It doesn't really matter what it is, because again, it's all scalable up and down as far as how long you want to spend in it. But the activate and allowing you to find where your agency fits in is a critical piece of that. So we move from that activate into the explore. And in the explore process is where we're really allowing kids and in our situation, kids to follow their passion, to follow the things that they want to learn about. Again, we have to understand that they may start down a path and hit a wall and say, man, I'm not interested in this at all. This is not what I thought this was going to be about. And then we've got to go back to that activate step and restart the process over again. And so those first 3 steps are really crucial. And then when we leave that explore, we move into the create. And the create is these next 3 steps are truly where learning takes place. So when we start talking about to create, to reflect, and to share, that's where the learning happens. Up until this point, we've given information, right? And so as you're giving information, you're building knowledge, but you're not necessarily getting to that authentic learning that we really want to get into. So with the create, and I'm not, just for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all 6 of the commonalities, but with the create, we start looking at the commonalities of us as individuals. And so we believe that some of those commonalities that exist is that we all are storytellers. We all follow principles and patterns, innovation and arts. And look, I'm going through them all anyway. Abilities, right? Spiritual growth and wellness, and then who we are as people and the history. And so when you look at these commonalities, in the outer circle of what we use as a map is where the courses are. So biology and math falls into principles and patterns. ELA falls into storytelling. And what really gets us going is that it hasn't been but for like probably the last 60 to 75 years that literacy has been what measured somebody's intelligence. up until that time, it's been their ability to tell a story, so storytelling doesn't just come down to reading and writing. It comes down to poetry. It comes down to music. It comes down to the spoken word, right? So a lot of different ways that you can explore those things. And then one of my passions is that systems and sustainability. I'm always really interested about how do things become sustainable. And that's where my marriage with Anne Frank has been great. Because it's about how do we make learning sustainable. And we believe this process that we're going through right now does that exact thing, right? It makes it sustainable as we go through. So that create piece of it, they go through these commonalities and they look and they find which way they want to go. For a student, for a kid, a lot of times that's in the innovation in arts, right? So that's through creating a picture or a new thing. And we have a video that I shared with you from a student that created it was storytelling and creation, right? But or innovation, excuse me. But she created a video that truly showed the current state of the world and tied in everything from pandemic to social injustice to our individual roles to create change. We had a second grader that created a Barbie that was a COVID Barbie, right? That came with masks and gloves. And so you start saying, hey, they're getting it and they're understanding, but they're showing it in different ways. So then we move to reflect piece. So after I create something, I want to sit back, I want to reflect, I want to know whether or not, what did I learn from this? What would I do differently? We want to have conversations with people. We want to sit down and get feedback and adjust. And then and that comes after we share. And I think the share. And so when you're really looking at it, steps 5, 6, 4, 5, and 6, right? My create, my share, and my reflect are all going to be kind of merged together, because as I'm creating, we want you discussing it, we want you talking about it, we want you reflecting on it, and then we want you to make some changes. So 4, 5, and 6 are pretty kind of go, because again, it's not a linear process, because I may get to the create piece and say, man, what I thought I knew, I don't really know. Let me go back to this activate, or let me go back to this explore. And so it's not as easy as just saying, hey, you just follow the pattern all the way down. I know that's a lot of talking, so I'm going to take a drink while you ask that next question.
No, I remember, before when we spoke before, that you talked about how important it is that there are some steps to follow. That I think the challenge when you're trying to shake up old learning models, right, is that at least in the old way, like there were these patterns and things that people were used to doing, right? There were worksheets to fill out and quizzes and tests and all these structures. And so even if some of it was busy work, at least there were things you could point to of like, this is what we're doing. So when you're trying to make the learning authentic and have students identify what things that they want to learn about, that's a good starting point. But in order to have to challenge them and help them stretch, right, then there have to be these steps, right? So that's why it's important to have things to share, right? So so that there's like the video you showed you is very moving and had a lot of imagery, and and it's important to to commit to what the student had to commit to what messages and what images and what clips she wanted in the video, and to be able to form that feeling in the viewer like me. So I think that's why if people are feeling skeptical, what does all this mean? But but this process, it really does add it's flexible, but it adds enough structure so that students actually are challenged, and they really are gonna come out of this with kind of the best of both worlds. Like they have a lot of knowledge, and they have the skills to be able to create stuff, but it's not stuff that was forced on them. It's stuff that they were motivated to discover, because these were questions that they wanted to answer.
Yeah, if you talk to any traditional school, right, what they're going to tell you is they struggle with relevancy. And the deal is because I can't make something relevant to you. And I can't prepare. I always love it when people talk about getting an animal before they have a kid. They're not the same. It's not the same, and I can't make responsibility relevant. And we love to say, well, this kid's not responsible or this kid's lazy. They are until they find something they're passionate about. And then when they're passionate about it, all of a sudden that responsibility kicks on, right? And all of a sudden when life requires us to do something, we do it. And so we want to start with that relevancy. We want to start with what is there. And what you talk about is very true from the standpoint of we create systems to make things sustainable. And when you start talking about having a 45-minute class or a 60-minute class, and you have to have 8 of them every single day, then guess what? You're going to have some things inside of there that aren't relevant. And and that's the beauty of what we're trying to create here, and then what we're also trying to share is it's not a secret. And we don't believe that learning is a secret. And I think that you could trace this back to a lot of our great philosophers. You could trace this back to they weren't single-minded. They weren't just engineers. They weren't just scientists, right? They were artists and scientists and storytellers, and they were all of it, all wrapped into one, because those commonalities really do exist. And we just want to make sure that we allow for people to have that space and opportunity to grow, and be that well-rounded, for lack of a better word, Renaissance person, right? I am working on my equity talk, so Renaissance person, not Renaissance man, right? But we want them to be able to be as well-rounded as they possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to be sure and ask. Okay, so this approach you guys applied to. I mean, you applied it on campus. You applied it during distance learning. For the students at Anne Frank. But one thing I really appreciate about the blog post is that you're sharing this approach so that families can apply this at home, right? So like some families are going to be trying homeschooling for the first time, and I think like things that are project based or inquiry based, it's a really good approach for personalizing the learning for kids. It's something that I've done as for supplementing stuff for my kids. So I'm thinking, what's your advice for parents who like they find this blog post and they want to apply it at home? So what are your tips for helping them get started on that?
Yeah, so if you're looking from a larger scale, and this is some of the things that we've had to learn here, but when you're looking at this from a larger scale, you also want to make sure you're focused on those fundamentals. You want your kids to be able to read, because the more they can read, the more they can activate, right? The more they can explore, the more they can do those things. And so it's not a single approach, because when you start looking, because again, let's scale it to a bigger picture. In our activate, we have to have those fundamental skills. We've got to have that fundamental knowledge. We've got to have that fluency in reading. We've got to have that fluency in numbers. So when you start looking at how we're built K-12, we're built to provide that fundamentals at our elementary level, so that our students can have more freedoms as they make it up into that high school level. So if you're trying to do this at home, if you're trying to do this, full time, don't leave the fundamentals. Don't just think you can turn people loose and just say, hey, go, right? You've got to sometimes be a little bit more, you've got to gradually work your way into it. And you've got to gradually teach the processes and the procedures that you need. And so one of the things that we know is you have to teach behaviors, right? And you have to teach processes. And so that would be the biggest piece of advice that I would have is make sure you're still focusing on what's important to learning. And the truth is, the more ways I can receive information, the more ways I can express information, right? And so when we start talking about offering multiple means of representation to students, to children, to everybody, don't just try to give it to them one way and just say, hey, it's 9 o'clock, go sit down and read. Oh, it's 9:05, stop reading and watch this video. Do it in a way that is relevant to them as they're learning through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually if I can sort of plug our, I was like this is the main page where families can go and they can find like lots of different activities. And we've been publishing this since like just about daily since June 1. And we have several posts about reading, the things like how to incorporate audiobooks, or like some suggestions of, how to use library resources, because yeah, like especially for younger kids, it's like you got to make sure that they're getting the fundamentals. And we've got things like math games, right? So it's like it's good for them to build up the math facts, but you can do it in a way where it's more fun, like make a game out of it, or like go on a nature walk and look for signs of math in nature. So just trying to find ways to like keep learning going but make it fun. And it sounds like what you're suggesting is like having these projects is really important, but especially for younger kids, balance it out with with other ways to get the information to them. And you said like building processes, right? So yeah, so I guess like for in our family's experience, it helped to have like, a certain place in the house this is where you sit with your book, or like certain times of day to do there's some things where it's really good to practice every day, right? Like for foreign language, like do your vocabulary. It's hard to
Bad.
get creative with that. What's that?
Schedules aren't bad. We all have schedules, right?
Yeah.
You have scheduled at 9 o'clock, right? Like we all have schedules that we have to go by. It's just a matter of, does that schedule become fixated? Do I work around the schedule, or does the schedule work for me? And sooner or later, right, you've got to change your schedule to fit your needs. So yeah, I think that's a misconception that people have about our school is that we're just kind of just show up and do whatever, and that's not it, right? We've got to have some type of structure, but that structure has to be relevant and has to be flexible in what it is that we needed to be able to do. So I definitely appreciate it. I know we're getting close to the end of that time, but I appreciate you allowing us to come on today. And if I could make one little plug, we do have some spots available in the middle school. Still, our high school and our elementary are starting to go on wait lists, but at the middle school area, we do still have a little bit of room that's left. And so if y'all are interested, please go to our website, set up a tour, come see us and see what we're about. And then appreciate y'all for sharing our plan the other day. We definitely appreciate that as well.
Yeah, and I want to highlight the plan. And it's easy to find. You just go to the homepage, and the pop up is right there. So if you're, but it provides a tremendous amount of flexibility to families as far as on campus, off campus. That they can find what works for them. And I was really impressed with, but not surprised, because it seems relevance is baked into what Anne Frank is doing. So yeah, I'm really grateful for your time. I'm grateful. This blog post is very well written. I hope it opens people's eyes to the possibilities. How this could work for their own kids, whether they're younger, whether they're teenagers, or even apply it. Adults can apply it in their own lives. If they're trying to find relevance, like maybe you're going through a career change or something, and you want to find right. It's like I went to law school, and I thought I would be running a small office, and here I am in the nonprofit space for education. Right. But I know I'm doing what I am meant to do, and it brings joy to me every day that I feel like the work I'm doing is very relevant. I'm able to help families. So
yeah, and that's what we want to be about, right? And so our three imperatives are belong, find joy, and be great, and it does, and it really does. And one of the things that we've really focused over the last year is aligning everything. And so we're a newer school. We've only been around for about 5 years, going into our 6th year, and a lot of places have been around a lot longer. As any learning process goes, there's been some bumps and there's been but we really feel like we've got that flywheel going now. We're getting some things that are aligned, and we're headed in that right direction, and very excited about where we're headed.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch it grow. Okay, I'm gonna put the website up there one more time. Encourage families to visit. Yeah, Anne Frank Inspire Academy, and yeah, like Mr. Johnston said, they do have some openings for the coming school year for middle school. So, okay, well, thank you so much. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts you want to share about? Yeah,
just the last thing that I don't guess I got to say. You can't do it wrong, guys, and that's the beauty of learning is you can't do it wrong. I think it's the Edison quote, right? That is the famous quote of I failed when I was trying the 100th time, right? I just knew there was 99 times that I learned how it didn't work. Jump out there, have fun with it. Go in with expectations of it being eye-opening, but don't have expectations about what it looks like, because it's learning, and learning's meant to be messy, and it's meant to be unsuccessful at times, because that's a form of learning, right? And we kind of forget that piece. But I'll shut up, because I could talk about that for another 30 minutes.
Well, I think that's very timely, because I feel like for myself, I think for a lot of people, learning brings joy, and in a time where we feel like there's so many things that are closed off to us, that our curiosity and learning can bring us joy. And I'm thankful for this blog post, because it'll guide a lot of people and their kids to finding that. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Okay. Bye.
Bye.